When it comes to a video game challenging the player's skill, the boss battle is the epitome of the experience. They represent a game's technical climax and are the ultimate test of whether or not the player has fully come to grips with the gameplay and mechanics that have been established. What makes a good boss battle is entirely subjective and based heavily on the game one plays, as you can likely see with lists everywhere from gaming sources, websites, and YouTubers as to what they consider to be their best or favorite boss battles. While the lists can significantly vary in content, there can often be some consistencies. Players of games like Dark Souls will often list bosses such as Artorias, Nameless King, and Gwyn as some of their favorite boss battles, and people that are fans of the Metal Gear franchise might point to classic fights such as Psycho Mantis. There's variation across games and platforms, but consistency in series and franchises. Regardless of franchise or genre, I believe there is a template of sorts as to what makes a boss battle good, which I divide into 3 umbrellas: the atmosphere of the fight to immerse the player, the challenge it gives to test their skills, and the overall satisfaction of victory. So let's jump right into analysis of each of these. First, we have what I call atmosphere. This is the sound effects, ambient music, lighting, narrative context of the boss, etc., etc. It's the emotions the developers and artists of the game are trying to make the player feel, the artistic representation of what it is you're fighting. It can do a lot to enhance the fight, and good atmospheres might even create the illusion that the fight is good. Something like Leviathan from Final Fantasy XV, where initially I thought it was such a visually stunning and amazing fight, until I found out that you can't possibly lose, and it serves no challenge whatsoever. A more excellent example of good atmosphere, and one I might do a full video on later, is Ganon from Ocarina of Time. From the fight's foreboding, quiet, and somber music to the dark lighting, Zelda's screams in the background, losing the Master Sword at the start of the fight, and Link being the wielder of the Triforce of Courage, the entirety of this fight is meant to instill a sense of hopelessness and fear. A fear that Link, the player, must overcome and battle against the odds. For comparison, some battles want to make things as over the top as possible, giving the player a sense of grandeur and power. Others can boil the fight down into a one-on-one duel against a rival to instill the player with the desire for vengeance. Others could intend to call the player out on their actions to provoke a sense of guilt in them. And others might just want the players to feel overwhelmed and against the odds. Next is the more opinionated part of a boss fight: challenge. I don't necessarily mean a difficult or frustrating fight. Difficulty is a part of it, but it's also entirely subjective. What one person might consider impossible or difficult, another might pick it up and do it in the first try. The best way to define challenge is the boss's ability to give the player a reasonable obstacle that tests the skills they have or should have been developing thus far. In the words of Edward Castronova regarding video games and their objectives, easy tasks lead to boredom, which leads to a return to the reflective state and self-consciousness. Hard tasks lead to frustration, which similarly leads to self-consciousness and a breaking of the spell. Battles that are too easy pull us out of the experience because we're bored. Battles that are too hard infuriate us and likewise pull us out of the experience. Essentially, what a battle needs to give the player is a fair challenge. The mechanics of a game or particular level is the core for the creation of challenge. It is the challenge or test of a player's mastery of what the game has given them. What is essential is that the player is given the chance to prove to the game that they have improved and are worthy of progressing. One of the best examples I can give is Virgil from Devil May Cry 3. The Devil May Cry series has a lot of good bosses and great challenges along the way, but what makes Virgil, particularly his final battle, a fair challenge is that both parties are at their best. Throughout the course of the game, Virgil has been updating his attacks and arsenal for this final battle, but so has the player. Compared to what they were when they faced him in Mission 8, the player will most likely have grown exponentially in skill, and the reward for this growth and journey is not a battle against an enormous abomination that only tests the player's patience, but a fight where your opponent is more or less on an even playing field, and the only thing keeping you from beating him is your own skill and usage of mechanics. Of course, the mechanics of the game can only take a player so far sometimes, and that's why many shooter games can struggle to create satisfying or challenging boss battles. There isn't much to the mechanics of some of these games other than taking cover, taking aim, and shooting. Strategic placement, movement, and gadgets can be key in some cases, but oftentimes the most boss fights in FPS games can do is add weak points for you to shoot at and then take cover, or just make a bullet sponge. But there are shooter games out there that have fun and engaging boss fights, so it's best to not discredit an entire genre. Challenge overall is both a quintessential and undeniably subjective factor in what makes a good boss fight. Some fights want to test the player's mechanical mastery of a certain level, theme, and obstacle. Others, like Virgil or Jean from Bayonetta, try to test out the player's overall skill and prowess against an opponent with a similar arsenal. Some fights aren't as fun merely because they just test the patience of the player and their ability to do the same thing over and over again with little variation. It's all subjective to what both the player and game are capable of, much more so than atmosphere. And alas, we reach the final category, satisfaction. Akin to atmosphere and challenge, this particular feat has a lot of things that can determine it, but the question should typically be, is the player satisfied they defeated this boss? But things can get a little muddled in some fights that seem to be narratively dissatisfying. Keeping this in mind, satisfaction can be divided up into two subcategories, narrative and mechanical satisfaction. Narrative satisfaction is tied into the context of the story and the relationship the player has with the boss. What the player shouldn't feel is a sense of pointlessness or disappointment, though this is all dependent on the execution by the game and the patience of the player. Satisfaction is usually attained when a villain or boss fight is built up to make the player feel as though they need to beat this thing into submission, or this boss is truly standing in their way. A long-standing rival, an epitome of evil, an unstoppable force, a legend beyond compare, so on and so forth. Outside of the narrative standpoint, however, satisfaction can work mechanically in the player's actual experience. What makes so many bosses memorable is their lasting impact on us, the satisfaction of defeating them, and a desire to do it time and time again. The lasting impression we have when it's all said and done. A form of satisfaction that goes outside of the narrative context. What I would say differentiates satisfaction from atmosphere is a sequence of order. The atmosphere sets up the fight, the challenge is the fight, and the satisfaction is the feeling after the fight. Of course, this isn't meant to suggest that these are not interrelated. What truly makes a good boss battle isn't just a good atmosphere with maybe a slight challenge and a mild victory, it's all of them working together. They are axioms correlated with each other that have as much of a chance at increasing the other as they do decreasing. A boss battle's satisfaction may skyrocket when the atmosphere of the fight is given care and attention. The challenge may feel more dire when the atmosphere presents it to be, and the challenge can ultimately lead to a more satisfying victory. A boss battle that's satisfying may lead the player to believe there was a greater challenge. There's a multitude of factors, and it's all subjective to the player's disposition and their experience, but ultimately, these variables and factors are interdependent. There is no single thing that makes a boss battle amazing. It's a multitude of factors that all work together to create one experience the player can enjoy, have fun with, and ultimately overcome. What makes a boss battle good is their setup, the fight, and the lasting impact on all of us. Or in other words, its atmosphere, challenge, and satisfaction. Lastly, I'd like to say that I plan on doing a little video series about this. I'll be taking a look at some of my favorite boss fights and analyzing them using this video as a sort of guiding template and evaluating each fight. Hell, I might even look at some fights that I dislike and see what went wrong. Regardless, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more.